Hi, Milan here. I'm back with Andy Dutton, who we spoke to earlier about what he would go back and tell his younger self. But today we're going to talk about a couple of values that he kind of lives and works by. And I think it's really important because as we talked through it before the video, I think there are things that everybody can use to enhance their performance or their career. So Andy, thanks for joining again. And
Thank you,
let's
Milan.
talk about the values that we were chatting about earlier.
Fantastic, Milan. Thank you. We were talking about just different, I call them values that I try to practice, and I'd like to talk about three. The first one is very similar to one we have in our organization called Better Together that I've always called believe in the best. And what I mean by believe in the best is that I am going to assume that the people I'm working with are always looking out for my best interests and that I'm always trying to look out for their best interests. And I had an experience at a previous company where a colleague of mine, uh, I felt like he was kind of poking his nose in my responsibilities. And we had a staff meeting that was offsite, and he made some statements there that I took objection to. And I flew home that day from Denver to Seattle, and I said to myself, I you know what? I think I've been thinking about this all wrong. I think he actually means well, and he's trying to help. So the next day, I called him on the phone and I told him, Dave, all this time I felt like you've been trying to hinder me, and I actually think you've been trying to help me. And so I just want to apologize. And we've had a phenomenal working relationship ever since. Just like in terms of like a willingness to help each other, to be creative, and to try to solve problems. So that's my first value, is just really assume that people are trying to help you. You can get burned because maybe someone isn't trying to help you, but okay, can you go to bed at night knowing that you believed in other people? I think so. That's important to me. The second one I call exert personal influence, not positional influence. And what I mean by that is it's really easy for people that have the right level of leadership just to dictate the outcome or the choices we make when making business decisions. But I think there's a lot of value in just expressing from a personal perspective how you think something should be done, and really just contributing to resolving or completing some work. And so my personal example there is I was on a project here where I felt like the performance testing effort was undermanned, underpersoned, whatever. And so I just started helping, and my contribution was to help the people leading that effort to really focus what they were reporting to the executives, but also just thinking about what's the most effective way to do performance testing. And we really changed the way that got done and made it more effective. And we also kind of got people out of our stuff, so to speak, right? Like we had less people poking their nose in every day wondering what's going on because we did a better job of communicating. And so that was impactful to me because after the fact, someone recommended that I take on more responsibility. I didn't ask for that. I just went to help somewhere because I thought help was needed. So that's what I mean by personal influence, not positional influence. And then the last one um, is be willing to, or go have the tough conversation first. Like, none of us want to have a tough conversation. It's not fun to have a tough conversation, but it's not going to change the fact that you need to. And so my example there is I was working for the CIO at a large software company, and I had to do an organization change. And that organization change required one of two people to essentially lose a lot of responsibility. So I went months mulling over this, figuring out how I could make this work. And finally, the CIO called me on the phone,
Mhm.
and she said, Andy, if you don't give me a new org chart tomorrow, I'm making your organization for you. And that's when I realized, oh, I've been stalling too long on this. And so I had the tough conversation. I would have had to have had it anyways. And frankly, everybody was better off knowing what their new position was. So just it was really good to be challenged in that way by my manager. I think she kind of shed light on the fact that I was taking way too long to do something that was distasteful, but that needed to be done. So anyways, Milan, those are three of my values that I try to practice and I'm not perfect. I fail, but those are the ones I try to practice on a daily basis.
No, that's great. There's lots of great, observations and also tools that you can use in that. Maybe we'll touch upon them just real briefly. Like the first one you mentioned was always better together, always assume the best, right? And I think for me, when I was listening to you, the one point that stuck in my head was that you have to have open communication to know what their intent is, right? I've always kind of been a proponent of go open the lines of communication. Like you can't assume you understand what's in somebody's head, right? Because again, we're not mind readers. I have that crystal ball example here that says it's got an out of order sign, because again, I don't know that I can always judge what the intent of one of my partners is. So it's better just to ask them. So I really appreciate you bringing that one up, because you opening that line of communication, you were able then to realize you're on the same page. But again, the perception's 9/10 reality. So again, I think it's a great lesson for everyone to say, if you ever have a question about somebody's intent, just go ask them directly. I don't, you don't have to do it in a negative way. So I think that was a great insight for everyone to kind of think as they go through. And then the second one I really liked, and I kind of do the same thing myself, which is, how do you build a relationship when the first time that you want something from a team, you're usually asking for something, right? And I think what you saw was the positive outcome of being selfless with another team, which is, let me help you with nothing in return, because I've never been in a situation where I've done, and I actually use that on purpose. When I join a new organization, I go find teams where we partner with. I just go try to help them out, because then they know I'm not just there for my own self-interest, that you can take a step for partnership that way. So it's a great tactic to use as well, proactively, as well as reactively, right? So if you see where you can help, I always usually try to volunteer to say, hey, how can I help you? And then, that builds that trust foundation amongst teams, that you're not always there asking for something from them, which then it just leaves a bad taste in your mouth, in my mind, when that's no, I'm not saying it never happens. Of course it does. And then the other thing in that one that I really liked is, and the term that I use, which is somewhat similar, is they don't always have to agree, but they have to understand, which means that there are times they're not going to agree with you. So like what you did is you bridge the gap with understanding by building a relationship and talking to them. And really, I think that's a very important point, that especially if you're working in engineering, your partners aren't always going to agree with the outcome, but if they understand it, well, then at least they can support it, because they're not wondering if they're wasting time or wasting resources, even if they don't agree, but they understand why it's important. So I think that's a great point. And the last one I really liked that you talked about was the tough conversation. And I always tell people, and I think even in your case, you were going to have a tough conversation. You're either going to have it early with the team, right, to get out, or you're going to have it later, which is why you didn't tell them till the last minute, right? So I have to say I agree with you. I always tell people you're better off having it early, because then you have time to work it out anyway. And not every tough conversation, I know it's hard. Nobody likes to have tough conversations. But I think most people, when they're reflective, would rather hear about it early rather than late. And I know it's just hard because we have to figure out some of the details at times, but I think it's really great insights on those values. And I definitely agree that they're great ones for everybody to think about, because there's lots of good, there's lots of good, as we say, value, but just in terms of how we work together on our teams, which then positively impact our careers. So thanks, Andy. Anything else you'd like to
Yeah,
talk about
I
those?
actually wanted to reflect one more time on the second one. I think I called it exert personal influence, not positional influence. I had an experience where I flew to India with a person that works for me, and we met with my team of 40, 50 odd people in India. And we had a big last day, we had a big all hands at a hotel,
Mm.
and we put a lot of effort into organizing it. And so I was just blown away with how much effort this person put into making not just that day, but my whole week was just like a huge success, in my opinion. And so I thanked her profusely. And then she said in front of everybody, she says, well, Andy, my job is to make you look good. And I think that's a really powerful thing for us all to think about. Yes, we all have our careers and we want to do well, but you can go a long ways if you ask yourself, what is really important to my manager and how can I help them be successful in what's really important to them? So, anyways, I learned that directly from one of my direct reports, and it was an awesome week that we had together. So,
No, that's great. And I totally agree. Like, make to me, I call it like organizational currency. What's important to your manager? You need to know that, because how can
yeah.
you be successful if you're not giving your manager what's important to them for the business? So I think it's a great insight, and that's a great example. So Andy, thank you so much for your time again on those topics, and I think a lot of people can reflect on those and realize that they probably are in similar situations, and a new perspective is always helpful. So thanks for your time.
Fantastic. Happy to help, Milan.